Hi, I'm Rene. I'm here from McBain Camera. I'm here to speak to Steve Wreakes. He is kind of an old favorite of our company. We've been dealing with him for a long time, and we've always enjoyed his photographs, and he kind of speaks particularly to this month being street and film photography. He rides both of those lines exceptionally well. His photographs are great, for one thing, but he's one of the few people I know who can and will spend days at a time walking around with a film or digital camera, just taking photographs of life around Alberta. He has a very interesting mind when it comes to these things, and it's well worth digging into.
First of all, thank you, Rene, for the kind words. I'm Stephen Wreakes, or Steve, either one. I have been a photographer for a number of years. I'm a graduate of the school soon to be formally known as Ryerson University. That was many years ago. I worked professionally. I was a medical photographer for over 30 years. Most of the time was spent here in Edmonton at the University of Alberta Hospital. During that time, the transition went from film to digital, and I think we realized to ignore that at your peril at the time. I've also, over the years, I've also thought it was important to keep doing some personal work. So that's what I've tried to do. I do carry a camera with me all the time. There have been some breaks in that, times when I didn't. I was so immersed in professional life that I didn't want to take pictures outside of work. I think that changed when we had children. So well, you know, you take pictures of your kids. Oh yeah. And all through the years, I've continued to shoot film, and I will continue to keep doing that. My preference has been for rangefinder cameras. I started using rangefinder cameras almost as soon as I got into photography. I mean, I did have a single lens reflex. I prefer the rangefinder for my personal work.
See, I sometimes find telephotos very handy for street photography if I want to isolate subjects or anything like that. Yeah. How do you approach isolation then without a telephoto?
You get closer.
Just get close. It's the old, if it's not a good photo, if you're not close enough.
Yeah, Robert Capa, yeah.
Yeah. I want to dig into one thing that you said to me a couple months ago before we get too far into this. You don't like using the term street photography.
I don't, and I mean, although it is Street Photography Month at McBain, so by all means, let's use it. We'll go with what you.
That's the hat that everybody kind of hangs on to.
Yeah,
but
I'm quite comfortable with being not just, but with just a photographer. I do other kinds of photography as well. The bulk of my stuff is done on the street. I will photograph some landscape too. I have done some large format in the past. I keep threatening to get my big camera out, but you know, the road to hell, as they say. So,
fair enough.
And I have done some still lifes and things around the film, and I will, even though I do shoot predominantly with film, I'll shoot with anything. When I was at work, it was quite structured. I was doing pictures for other people, and some of the things I did were very, very structured. So now that I'm retired, I can be as loose and as sloppy as I want. I can just go out with a camera, and some days I get things that I like, some days nothing, you know. And if you're photographing people on the street too, it's sometimes I ask permission, sometimes I don't. And I found that certain themes have come to the fore. Street musicians, street preachers. Street preachers I just shoot. Same with the musicians, I usually wave the camera. I've never had a street musician turn me down, and I always tip the street musician.
Of course.
Buck of frames my going rate. So
carry a lot of loonies.
Yeah, well, or $5 bills, because you know.
Yeah, exactly.
Although I do tend to shoot fairly sparingly. I won't go through reams and reams of film. It's just the way I've always shot.
All right, actually, let's dig into that, because I mean that's kind of counter to a lot of photojournalism. Like the people who actually approach street photography from the photojournalism route have always been taught in school, shoot as much as you can all the time.
Volume.
Yeah, volume. And make sure you get the shot just by covering every single angle, every single focal length, everything you can do to make sure you get the shot.
Yeah, and I think that too was influenced by my career. As I said, I was a medical photographer. Can't do that, especially if you're in the OR or in, you know, you can't stand there and say, oh, I'll take 100 shots. It was like, get in, get the shot, and back away. I think that sort of translated into what you know.
It makes sense.
It's influence. Let's put it that way.
Well, speaking of influences, I see a lot of influence there too from like a lot of the classic guys too, like HCB or Bresson, for example.
Yeah, I'm also a fan of history of photography, and I think it's I think it's important for young photographers to know that they're carrying part of a tradition. Photographers who have probably been, yeah, Cartier-Bresson, certainly the master, and Cortège too.
Okay, yeah.
But I also admire the work of Joseph Kudelka, Diane Arbus, who is possibly one of the bravest photographers that ever lived. That's my opinion. Lee Friedlander, Gary Winogrand, people like that, Robert Boisneau.
I'm sorry you brought up Irwit.
Irwit too, yeah. Well, Irwit's certainly a favorite as well.
Well, I see a lot of Irwit in your work though too.
Yeah.
Like there's a little bit of humor in some of your shots. Where
Yeah, so that's the kind of stuff that if you go looking for it, it's not there. It just, you find it, and even if you miss it, it's like, oh well, I saw it.
okay, well that brings it back to technique then, because I mean, if you're being careful with your shots, you're getting in, getting out to get the shot and that sort of thing, a certain amount of your time is spent looking, not photographing, just looking.
Yeah.
Is that true in this case?
Yeah,
or
I think so. Anticipating. Maybe.
Anticipating?
And sometimes again, sometimes you miss it, and so what,
So you mentioned your other photographs too, in terms of like still lifes and landscapes and a bit of portraiture here and
Yeah.
there, that sort of thing. Where's the philosophical difference between your day-to-day on wandering around photographing versus when you're purposely going out and trying out a different genre?
Yeah, I think with landscape, it's maybe a more of a reflective, no pun intended.
No worries.
There's a more deliberate, especially if you're using a big camera. I'm going to put a plug in here for a group that I'm part of, which is the Monochrome Guild.
Of course.
Rob Pohl started the group, and Rob is I've never met anyone who knows more about large format photography than Rob. I used to describe us as a bunch of middle-aged men who were still enamored with film, but the group has expanded since then. Portraiture with a large format camera too, I've done some of that, and that to me becomes a collaboration, because the subject, they know they're being photographed.
Of course.
It's an obvious, and I think there's that formality and the almost ritual-like process to doing it. Reminds me of a quotation by James, I think it's pronounced Bone or Bound, who used to shoot for the Guardian, did portraits, and she died a few years ago, but another photographer well worth looking up, she said that she found from her portraiture sessions that the first pictures and the last pictures were usually the better ones, so she stopped taking the ones in the middle. I have noticed that, to my eye anyway, there's a difference between a scanned print and a scanned negative.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Where do you find the difference?
Well, the print is sort of, hopefully, if you made a good print, that's the final thing. Whereas scanned negatives, you can actually do a lot of manipulation. But I still think whether you're printing traditionally or scanning and printing, I think it's important to make prints.
I agree. Yeah, I mean, there's something tangible about the print that you can't get off a file. Well, that's literal in this case, but
I've heard, I don't know who said it first, but I've heard photographers say, well, it's not a photograph unless it's a print. The street musicians and some of the young people on Pride Corner, and I know Claire, who's one of the organizers through Folk Festival, make them prints, give them prints.
Actually, is there a symbiosis, do you think, or a continuing line between photographing musical events and shooting street as well?
I don't know, because I do shoot at Folk Festival.
Of course, yeah.
I've been on the crew there.
I've just noticed that the Venn diagram of street photographers and music photographers is fairly heavily overlapped.
Yeah, I mean, working out in public and pointing your camera at strangers can be a little nerve-wracking.
Yeah, yeah.
And so those kind of things, Folk Festival, Pride Parade was a great thing to do that. Everyone's dressed up, everyone's having a good time. People will pose for you.
It's performative.
That's right. You're covering a performance. So that's a good way to get into this kind of thing. There are some days when I'm fearless, and other days it's like, well, I'm going to put my camera away and go and have a coffee.
Is that how you handle it? Then I wouldn't say the jitters, but just the I don't want to confront people kind of feeling that people get through occasionally.
I've never actually been threatened or anything like that.
I have a personal theory too that to be really good at street photography, you have to be good at kind of blending in a little bit, or not being necessarily unobserved, but not.
Apparently Cartier-Bresson could make himself invisible. I don't know. That's getting easier for me actually, is becoming invisible. That's part of that's my age, A late middle-aged man, it's like, who cares?
Yeah, you're just not threatening. So.
That's right, no. Since retired, I've traveled a little bit because one of our daughters lived in Japan for 3 years. So I had trips to Japan. Tokyo is a wonderful place. for any photographer, whether you're a street photographer or even just a gear hound. You know, if you want used Leicas, they're all in Tokyo.
Actually, what's their attitude towards the camera then when you bust it out on the street? Do they even notice it? Do they care? Or?
I don't know.
I mean, you're a little more visible there as a
Yes,
different
hopefully.
ethnicity. So
Yeah, but nobody's. I've taken photographs in Japan, and you think, oh, they'll be sorry. Then you look at the print, it's like 6 people looking at you. So it's fine. A couple of years ago, we went to Scandinavia because one of our youngest daughter was living in Stockholm, so we went for a visit and travel around. I took this, and a Ricoh GR.
Yep.
And so I didn't, because I knew we were going to be traveling around a lot, so I didn't want to burden myself with lenses that I probably wouldn't have used anyway.
That makes sense.
And then when you travel with one lens, it's like, well, I got to use this. So
Actually, so you brought the GR with you. How did you know what to shoot at any given point? Or did you just intuit your way through it?
yeah, I guess, you know, most of the time I shot with this or my phone. I shoot with the phone.
Okay, so you can join me on the sentiment if you want, but I still think that the pretension of photographers saying, "Oh, I never shoot with my film," has got to go away. We all shoot with what we have on us.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's right. Yeah,
Yeah, and if you have your phone, you shoot with your phone.
yeah. Shooting with phone's fun, actually.
Yeah, it's freeing in a certain way.
Yeah, it is. I mean, if another photographer I admire is Dado Moriyama, and Moriyama, for most of the time, he's just used point and shoots. He's not. It was Iraqi, another photographer, Nobuyoshi Iraqi, said that Moriyama is not a slave to the camera.
Right there.
Yeah, but
Like, I don't know if you're aware, but there's actually a number of Edmonton photographers making a name of them for themselves, shooting strictly film point and shoots.
okay,
Yeah, actually, Tegan Mangungo comes to mind. He's actually a great photographer.
don't know.
The local guy. He
Yeah.
shoots really good stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, all he uses is film point and shoots.
Point and shoots. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's making its comeback, and it's really nice to see. I like the fact that we're getting back to, no, it's the image that's important, not
Yeah.
necessarily the gear.
Yeah. I mean, there are still people who will, to me, an overworked Photoshop. I'm
Yeah.
old-fashioned. I like my photographs to look like photographs, and so if you're going to overwork it, then it starts to drift into photo illustration.
Absolutely.
But that's again.
I mean, full illustrations are great when they're
Oh, yeah.
with that intention. Yeah,
Yeah.
of course. Yeah. I'm also a bit of a lazy editor.
Oh yeah, me too. It's like no, I'm a lazy printer too. You get a negative that you say, this is going to be really hard to print. I'll move on and print it later.
Do you find that photographing these places adds an extra kind of layer to nostalgia when you look back?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they jog memories.
Yeah, of course.
You know, the picture of HIROTO and YOKO, that was taken in Kasama, in Ibaraki Prefecture. That was my first full day in Japan ever.
I mean, that's the whole thing with like a lot of photographers. You put your memories into the photographs. You know, it's hard to call up without those photographs at a
Yeah.
certain level.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah.
And I certainly don't go out with any intent that I want people to feel a certain way or have certain thoughts about my photos. I mean, you're entitled to your own experience about the photos, right?
That's absolutely true.
Which I think is
Yeah.
something that along those lines that Lee Friedlander said. I mean, philosophically, probably Lee Friedlander and Gary Winogrand and Robert Frank have been my big influences. As a final thought, French photographer Robert Boisnot, who was a contemporary of Cartier-Bresson, once said, "If I knew how to take a good photograph, I'd do it every time."